Visiting with us this morning, it is not an accident that you are here. You might think that it's coincidence, but it's not. It's providence. We're a big God church, and God is sovereign over all things, and there's no mistake that you're here this morning, and I think God wants to speak a fresh word to you. Well, take your Bibles and go to the book of Matthew. We do what's called expository preaching, so we go line by line through books of Scripture in their entirety, and we've been going through the book of Matthew. Have you guys enjoyed it? Yeah. No, it's been awesome. Andrew killed it last week, yeah? Yeah. I was so encouraged by that. Matthew chapter 5, and we'll pick up where he left off. We'll be in verses 38 to 42. Turn there, and I'll meet you there in just a moment. On Monday, the Pentagon confirmed that it struck dozens of targets inside Iran, and the word that the Pentagon used was retaliation. Retaliation for strikes on our bases in Jordan. The Iranian state media reported that among the dead were a couple and their 2-year-old child. San Antonio, Texas, 2 people were arrested after a shootout on the highway. Here's how it started. One car drove through a puddle and splashed the other car. There was a 2-year-old strapped in the back seat when the shooting started. Right here in Tampa, 3 teenagers on July 13th were ages 13, 14, and 16. They were charged with attempted murder for throwing rocks at homeless people sleeping on MLK Boulevard. Police said the motive was that they were, quote, bored. You know, I think we struggle with what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery. That we talk about ourselves in the 21st century, in 2026, as if we're so enlightened and advanced. And yet, you know, as much technological advancement that happens, or AI, or flying cars, or whatever, you know, we woke up this morning and the world is still teeming and full of violence and brokenness all around us. And if you don't see that, then there's something broken in you. But you know, in this little news list here, it's like none of that started very big. It's a splash of water on another car, or boredom. Every single one of these things, it always starts small, and then it spirals and it snowballs, and then it becomes something that someone else refused to let go of. And so we live in this vicious cycle of vengeance and violence and retaliation. That's the world that we live in. Enter Jesus of Nazareth. Verse 38. Let's read the text together. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. This is the word of the Lord for us this morning. Let me give you the big idea that stands over this text and runs through it. This is the sermon in a sentence, and here it is. Your king requires you to answer both offense and need with surprising grace. I'll say it again. Your king requires you, O follower of Jesus, precious Christian, he requires you to answer both offense and need with surprising grace. Now, before I jump into this text this morning, so write that down, and as you're writing that down, let me just give you some introductory notes here. Number one, this paragraph in the Sermon on the Mount has been misused a lot in 2 different directions. Half the world uses it to turn Christians into doormats, and the other half uses verse 38 to justify getting even. And so before I just do this, I think someone needs this in the first 5 minutes and not the last 5 minutes. Look at me. Scripture never commands you to be a passive victim of verbal, physical, or sexual abuse. You know, there's writings like in 1 Peter or in Romans 13 where he writes the people suffering in circumstances that they cannot control, and they don't have a viable, God-glorifying out in those circumstances. And he gives counsel for how to suffer well. But in our 21st century, those two things aren't the same. We have legitimate avenues that are still glorifying to God that and allow us to get out of situations where we don't need to be punching bags for losers. All right? Does that make sense to you? Very important. It's a great thing when you bite your tongue in the checkout line when the guy is running his mouth. It is a terrible thing to sit and watch a bully hurt you or someone else that's vulnerable and defenseless. You know, somebody has told someone else in this room that this passage means that you have to stay, and you don't. You don't. That's not what this is. So what is this? Well, in this text, what we have found in our study, me and John Tracy, the lead pastor in Odessa, as we were wrestling through this, we found 5 marks of surprising grace. 5 marks of surprising grace. That's the outline for this morning, and I'm going to give you the first one right now. Number 1, you show surprising grace as a follower of Jesus when you, number 1, stop quoting God's justice to license your revenge. You stop quoting God's justice to license your revenge. Look at verse 38. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now, this is really easy because this is the same formula that he's been doing throughout the sermon. They're called the antitheses, and there's 6 of them. You've heard it said, but I say to you. But here, like in the past, Jesus has been correcting distortions. But here, verse 38 is a direct, legit, straight-up quote out of God's law, out of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. It occurs 3 times in the Torah, an eye for an eye and a tooth for tooth. Typically in a longer list, life for life and hand for hand and foot for foot, burn for burn, etc. And it sounds barbaric because you're arrogant and you're imposing your preconceived ideas of justice onto the text and you think that they're outdated. This seems barbaric until you know 2 things, and I'll give those to you right now. Number 1, that law, next slide, that law was for judges, for civil magistrates. It was for the people in authority who held civil court. It's not for neighbors. So to apply it for individuals living in the personal sphere and not the court system is a misapplication of those texts. This is not a section of how you should get along with your neighbor. Okay, Deuteronomy 19 and Exodus 21 Deuteronomy 19 names them, and Exodus 21 is clearly sitting in a section of magistrates over civil justice. The second thing is that this lex talionis is mercy. An eye for an eye, that lex talionis is older than Moses when he wrote it. It's also in the code of, anyone know? Yeah, Hammurabi. And who was in Babylon centuries before Sinai with the same examples, an eye, a tooth, all that kind of stuff. But there was a difference. Hammurabi priced the eye differently depending on whose head it was in. If you put a nobleman's eye out, then you definitely lose yours, if not 2. But if it was in someone who was just a peasant or a commoner, you just pay some silver and go home. But then God gives Israel one standard. Everyone's eye is worth the same. One eye for one eye, no matter whose head it finds itself in. So it's more merciful than anything in the world around it, and actually gives value to people instead of diminishing them based on their socioeconomic status. But also, it stopped the cycle of retribution and violence from going further. So it was one tooth for one tooth and not anything else. So it capped the punishment. And so it was merciful. Now, by the time Jesus was preaching this sermon, people had broken this in 2 different ways. Number 1, they changed the address. They took a courtroom statute. Do you understand this is a courtroom thing for judges? And they shifted it to their kitchens. So that if you ram my car, well, according to Torah and God's law, I'm obligated to ram your car. That's what they were doing. And then the second thing is that they were changing the ceiling into a floor. God said you can't take more than an eye for an eye. And they heard, if you poke my eye, I'm required by God's law to poke your eye. And so when God gives them this law, he's giving them a ceiling, and they've shifted that thing down to become a launching pad for more retribution. It's a complete twisting of the scriptures. I want to be really clear. He's not canceling this courtroom justice ethic out. This is a good ethic. In a courtroom, an eye for an eye is holy and righteous and good. What he's going after is how they've taken it out of the courtroom and putting it into the heart. And what he's forbidding is this cold, sick, twisted rush that you get from, and this pleasure, this sick pleasure that you get from making someone else pay who wronged you. So the question that I have is, what about you? What conflict are you in right now? Who made you hurt? Because I don't know if you know this, we tend to hurt people, and we like to hurt people the way that we've been hurt ourselves by them. And you know what I'm talking about because you were thinking this the moment I started talking about this. Are you after justice? Are you really after justice? Or are you trying to make someone pay and get one up? You don't want to get even. You want to get up. You want to get one up. You know, God's not asking us to dissolve court systems and ways of dealing with justice. God cares a whole lot about justice, and particularly for the immigrant, the widow, the orphan, and the poor. You know, those four groups occur a ton in the Old Testament, and he cares a lot about justice for them. But what he's asking us here is to stop holding this court system type thing in our marriages, in our kitchens. And Jesus is saying this because this might be that the very verse that you keep quoting to justify your sick, twisted desire to see someone pay, it wasn't written for that purpose. You're quoting it, and it was written to actually stop the very thing that you're trying to do with it. And so this is Mark 1, of surprising grace, is that you just give up trying to use God's word, his justice ethic, to license your own revenge. Make sense to you? Yep. Number 2, second Mark, verse 39. You let the insult land without launching one back. This is hard. This is the hard teaching of Jesus. Verse 39 says, "Do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." The two things in here that I want you to see. First, the one who is evil. See that phrase there in verse 39, the one who is evil? It's not talking about the evil one or evil in general, that you should just resist the evil forces that are out there in general. This is a person. Okay, it's an individual. It's a dude who has wronged you significantly. And that's important because Scripture actually commands us to resist the devil. I just read this, James 4, verse 7. Resist the devil and he will what? He'll flee from you. And so this can't mean don't ever push back on anything. The verb here is directed toward a person, and specifically what he's getting at, this is what you should jot down if you're taking notes. He's rejecting the idea. He's saying discard the idea of standing over against somebody in the same posture that they're standing against you. That's what he's getting at. So it's don't resist in kind. Don't hand it back and dish it out the way that it was dished to you. And Paul understood this. It's very interesting in the book of Thessalonians when he's talking about how they should live. He doesn't say don't resist evil. He says something that's a little bit more specific. He says make sure no one repays evil for evil. Don't repay evil for evil. Same command, but I think Paul actually clarifies and makes it more plain than what Jesus meant. Don't pay it back. And so this isn't like a stand down and be a doormat. This is a stand there against your aggressor, against your oppressor. Stand there, but do not become the same thing that's standing in front of you. The second thing I want you to see is that it says the right cheek. Very interesting. Luke's gospel leaves that detail out, but Matthew puts it in. Everybody point really quick to your right cheek. Some of you aren't doing it. All right. Raise your hand if you're left-handed. Only a few. Right-handers, let's go. So I want you to think about this. If I if I'm right-handed, as most people are, and as most people in Jesus' audience are, and I'm coming at you to slap you, I would use my palm and I would hit what side? Your left side. I'd hit your left side. But to get your right cheek, what do I have to do? I have to backhand you. I got to backhand you. I almost thought about calling someone up here, and I was like going back and forth, and I was like, no, that's stupid. Don't do that. But so in this world, in that world, like this is not a fight. It's not a fight. It's not an altercation. It's a statement. It's what a master did to a slave. It's what a superior did to someone who was dubbed inferior. It was one of the most severe public assaults on a person's value in this culture, which is why the word is slap, not punch. If you want to, if you slap someone, you're not trying to beat someone up that you're slapping, unless you're Jackson. Where's Jackson at? I'm just kidding, brother. That's how, there he is. That's a joke. I wouldn't want to throw hands with you. But you don't slap someone when you're trying to beat them up. You punch them when you're trying to beat them up. And so a slap is not an attack on someone's health. It's an attack on their honor. And I found some rabbinic codes in my study this past week. They had fixed payments for public humiliation like this. And it's interesting. They charge double restitution for a backhanded slap because this is a shame honor culture that Jesus is speaking in. And so the insult is worth more than the injury itself. So think about this. Their legal system could put a dollar amount on your shame. They had a rate for this. And this is what he's saying. This is precisely the check that Jesus is saying, do not cash that check. Absorb it. This is a hard teaching of Jesus. But now watch what this does. We already talked about. So the backhand only works from someone who's coming from above, from a position of power, and they slap someone that they deem as less important or subhuman than them, right? But when you stand up again and you give them what cheek? The other cheek, you're forcing them to do what? Slap them as an equal. As an equal. This is a contested, but many scholars actually take this view, and it's contested, it's conjectural. But when you turn the other cheek, you're actually taking the first option off the table, and you're forcing them to make two decisions. They can either quit and stop, or they can come at you as an equal. Like, that's not doing nothing, bro. That's not just like you laying down and just being a doormat. You're still there. Your face is up. You are looking at them in their eyes, and without saying a single word, you're forcing them to make a decision, the person that hit you, that they never wanted to make. And it's like, bro, like, wake up is sort of what you're saying to them. What is this whole system that you've bought into, that you live in, where you think that you need to assert yourself as more important and me as subhuman than you? What is this whole system that you've bought into? And the heart posture in this isn't to prove something to them. It's for them. And scholars argue about this and the mechanics of that and the culture, but the point is that the insult definitely stops with you. Chrysostom, a pastor from the 4th century, he said it like this. He said, one fire is not quenched by another fire, but only fire by water. I think we still live in a backhand world, don't we? I think we just have different vehicles or mediums by which we deliver our backhands. In our culture, it's like a tweet, right? Or it's the comment section of Facebook or Instagram or YouTube, or you merge all those together: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TwitFace. It's the comment section there. It's the group text that you create where the one person is just conveniently left out and they know it. Our backhands have send buttons now. And so, what does it look like to actually turn the other cheek in the 2026 year? And let me tell you about a hypothetical fight, in my own kitchen, but maybe this is you. Maybe my wife says, babe, why'd you eat my banana? I told everyone To not eat the last banana, I needed that. Well, babe, 10 minutes ago, where was I? I was in the shower. I can't hear anything about your banana while I'm taking a shower. How am I supposed to hear about you talking about your precious banana when I'm in the shower? Jenna, if you would just think once in a while before you talk, then you wouldn't accuse me of stuff like this. Flag on the play, right? It's right there at the end. Did you catch that? If you would just think before you talk once in a while, that's not defense. That's retaliation of a perceived offense and assault on my honor. There's a better way forward, and you could just, hey, I was in the shower, I didn't hear you, and then you just leave it at that, right? But you let the accusation kind of just stand there, and then you don't backhand through your words. You know, most of us, you're not one insult away from some crazy act of vengeance. You're a hair trigger away from defending an honor that no one actually even intended to attack. But you're so sensitive. You're so sensitive. Now, I can't leave this here without showing you where Jesus is standing when he says this. I want you to think about where he's standing at. They called him a glutton. They called him a drunkard. They called him an illegitimate child. They said he was crazy. And at the end, men who hated him, they walked up to him and they spit in his face. They spit in his face. It didn't do any actual damage to his health, but imagine the wound. And he could have called fire down from heaven to consume them in a moment. He could have had legions of angels to just overtake them in a second, and he didn't. And you know, Peter watched this, and he wrote it down in his epistle. He said, when they hurled their insults, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. He entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He didn't tweet back. And so this teaching here, man, is like, dude, don't be a doormat. This is a hard tension to walk in, but don't be a doormat. But let them defraud you and let God defend you, is the teaching here. I love what Spurgeon said. He said, we are to be the anvil as bad men are the hammers. And then John Stott later on would comment on this, and he would say, yes, and an anvil is one thing, and a doormat is something else entirely. You know, Jesus got slapped at his own trial. That was illegal. John 18 says that he lodged a protest right there in the room. He wasn't totally passive. He actually appealed to law. So it's not total passivity. But what Jesus is teaching here is that there is a cost for insult, and there's a double cost when you pay it back. When you fire back, you actually agree with the person attacking you about who's in charge of the value that you've placed on yourself. This is Mark 2. You let the insult land without launching one back. Number 3, we hand over more than the lawsuit demanded. We hand over more than the lawsuit demanded. This is from verse 40. Look what happens in verse 40. If anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. So the scene just changed. Verse 39 is someone backhanding you, right? And verse 40 has shifted into the context and the scene of a courtroom. The word sue means to literally be judged by. So someone is using the legal system correctly to take the clothes off like a living body of a disciple and follower of Jesus. That's what's going on here. Now, a couple things about these garments. The tunic was your basic undergarment. Think like long johns. But the cloak was this like heavy wool wrap. And you wore it all day, and then you would sleep in it at night. And so it's your shirt, basically, our modern day shirt, and then our coat. And in Galilee, it gets cold at night. Which is why I have a verse here from Exodus. Exodus 22, it says this. God actually has a law about this, about the cloak. He says, if you take your neighbor's cloak as a pledge, give it back before dark, before the sun goes down. Because that's his only covering. And what else is he going to sleep in? And this is the line that I love. And when he cries out to me, I will hear him, for I am gracious. God cares about the blankies given to people who need it. So it's not just a property statute. This is God personally co-signing a poor man's blanket so he can be warm at night and lay his head down and rest. So look at the man that Jesus puts in his teaching here in Matthew chapter 5. This is obviously a lender, someone who gives out money with interest expected. He knows the law says that he can't touch the cloak, right? He knows he's not going to ever get the cloak because God's law prevents that. So what does he do? He sues for the shirt off the dude's back. Like, fine, you know what? Can't have your blanket? Like, I'll take your undershirt. And like, it's intended to be ridiculous. Like, you should read this and be like, this is crazy. Like what? Are you really that petty? You just want to make him itchy in his wool coat all night? Right? You've been in wool without. You know, when I was dating Jenna, I had zero money, probably $20 to my name, not including like the $20,000 of debt. And I was at this garage sale. It is amazing that she is married to me. This guy had this like Islamic, Afghan robe coat thing. I was like, bro, that's sweet. How much? It's like $10. It's like half of what I own. And I said, deal. And I bought it, and I would wear that thing. And it's itchy. I wear it often without a shirt. People think I'm an idiot, which is fine, because I am. But I walk around, it's itchy. Like, the character here is like, are you serious? Like, you're that petty? Jesus is putting the greediest, pettiest human being villain that he possibly could in this story. It's the villain, it's the cartoon villain. And Jesus is like, for that one, you go above and beyond. You go above and beyond for that one. This is a hard teaching of Jesus. Can't take the cloak, it's legally untouchable, so when he hands it over, so when he takes the cloak, or the shirt, and you hand over your cloak, it's voluntary. It's a willful decision. It's a choice. And so, you know, as I think about application for this point, like, where is this for us? Like, I don't know, the estate, the business partnership that didn't go great, the loan that never came back to you. You know, you loaned some money and it promised to come back and never came back, and person just like disappeared, the contractor who took the deposit and like vanished. And Paul asks this in 1 Corinthians, specifically toward believers, but he says, why not rather just be wronged? And there's something in me that really recoils at even saying these types of things, but I think it's because we just demand and hold too close our things and our money and our possessions. And you know, maybe in the legal battle, you're the one with the teeth in the legal struggle, and so for you, like, you have a court or you have a contract or whatever. Does that court and contract or that HR policy determine the boundary of your generosity, or does Jesus? I think for most of us, the cloak is not really property at all for us. It's sometimes it's the last word. That's what you need to give up your last word in the fight, in the battle. You know that you deserve an apology. Maybe that's your cloak. Sometimes it's the explanation that you'll never get. You know, handing over the law, handing over the things that what the law protects in you can mean handing over your right to be proven right. You know, these are hard things, and they require a lot of wisdom. They're principles, they're illustrations. Jesus is demanding a heart here that just sits loosely to its own rights. I debated sharing this part because it kind of makes me look at the hero as the hero, but like, I'll just, you know, a little precursor. My heart was so jacked up in this experience. When I was 26, the longest standing relationship of my life ended. My mom died. And it was the worst season I ever walked through. I had finished seminary with my MDiv, moved states, started my first job here at Keystone about 9 years ago, had my first baby, and my mom died all in a period of like 6 months. It was horrible. At the end of her life, she was with a guy, rough guy, I won't mention his name, but alcohol, meth, all of it. And one night he got really drunk, and he chased my mom around the property there up a little north and tried to beat her. Cops were called, and he got arrested, and my mom got a restraining order. And that, look at me, that was the right call, okay? That's the right call. That's not a failure of grace. Getting yourself away from a violent man is actually obedience and respectful to them and to you. You're preventing them from sinning, and you're giving value to yourself, which you have because you're an image bearer. It's not weakness. But you know what, man? Loneliness is kind of hard sometimes, isn't it? Loneliness has driven some of you to do some wild things. And there's grace for that. But eventually, because of that, they reconnected, and then she passed away. And so the mobile home that he assumed, the mobile home they lived in, would just be taken by him. But there was no, his name wasn't on the deed, and I was the sole heir of that mobile home. And so it came to me, but he decided that it was his. And I told him that I wanted to sell it and just be done with this whole thing, and he refused to leave. He would not get out of the house. And so he wanted to make me start an eviction process to carry, that's like 60 more days of trying to get people out. So you're carrying 2 mortgages on a fresh salary at a church. It was tough, man. Remember that? But it was really hard. And, he called me one night, screaming, cursing at me, yelling, and then he said, you know what? He's so angry. He says, I hope your 6-month-old baby girl dies in the middle of the night. This is who I was dealing with. And so here's how it ended. I asked him, I said, you know what, dude, he had already stolen the trailer and a bunch of other things. And I said, if I give you my mother's van, would you just vacate? And I could change the locks and we could be done with this. So he agreed to this. And so this is one of the most awkward things I've ever done. I remember driving with him to the DMV in the van because we had to drive back. We had to do this together, and I didn't want to do this, but it was the best way to do it. So we drive to the DMV together in my mom's minivan to sign the title over to him. Most awkward car ride ever, by the way, And when the woman behind the counter, she says, that'll be $100. And I just stood there and I was like, all right, sweet. And I look over, he's just looking at me. And I'm like, dude, whatever. Pull my wallet out, give the lady the card. It's crazy. This is crazy. So I guess externally I did this, but internally I hated it. I was seething in anger. I was struggling with the Lord that he would allow in his sovereignty things like this to happen to me. I felt like a sucker that just got bamboozled, that's a fun word, out of what I should have had anyway. I feel like I let the bad guy win, and I drove home just ticked, man. The law was on my side the whole time, but when you read a text like this, though, you're like, man, this could have been a coat and not just a shirt. And it's like, this is what it means to follow Jesus. And I failed that day, man. I failed. I didn't do it in a posture of worship. And I let a courtroom policy determine the length and the boundaries of my generosity. But this is what it means to follow Jesus. This is the kind of stuff. Maybe that was a bad illustration, but number 4, we got to move on. I keep walking when the required mile is over. This is cool. Look at verse 41. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, you go with them 2 miles. The word forces here, it just means to commandeer. Like you forcefully commandeer someone. In the Gospels, it's a very technical term for a Roman soldier grabbing a Jewish civilian in occupied territory and then making them carry your gear. Rome owned the world, and a soldier on the road, he's tired, doesn't feel very good, doesn't feel like carrying his own stuff, and so he sees you like you're one of the conquered ones. You have no power. I have a sword. I have the empires behind me, and you don't have any options. And so they could do this. They could just find any Jewish boy and have them carry their stuff for. So Rome knew this would get abused, and so they capped this policy at 1 mile, which is different than our mile, about 4,850 feet. And the Jews hated this. They hated it. And so you need to understand the room that Jesus is speaking to. There are men in this crowd that are carrying knives, likely in their coat, because they're going to kill the next Roman soldier who throws their gear at them. Like, this is who Jesus is preaching to. And I read in my study, my commentaries this past week, that every Jewish boy likely had a mile staked off from his farm or his field or his front door, 1 mile staked off. Because if he ever got seized by a soldier, which would have happened often, he would carry that pack, and as soon as he saw that stake, he would drop it and say, "Done." Not one step more. Picture that, man. You got a whole nation of men who have measured in advance the exact distance of their obedience. And this is a hinge point in the text here, in this passage, because up to this point, the disciple has only ever been reacting. Right? So somebody slaps you and you respond. Someone sues you and you respond. Someone has, so far the disciple in this paragraph has always been reacting in this entire paragraph. But here, you hit the mile marker and you've done what's required of you. And you keep walking. For the first time in 5 verses, the disciple is not reacting anymore, he's initiating. The first, and like as I think about this, it's like the first mile is giving to Caesar what is Caesar's. Remember that teaching of Jesus where he's asked about money and taxes and all that, The first mile is you giving to Caesar what is Caesar's. But the second mile is giving to God what belongs to God, which is your obedience and in your worship and in your generosity. In other words, mile 1 is obedience, mile 2 is worship. Yeah, if you get your eyes back to verse 20, Jesus had said this. He said, "Unless your righteousness exceeds the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of God." Guess who walked 1 mile perfectly? They did. They just would never take step 1001. Yeah, put this in 2026, and I think that this week, someone is going to take something from you this week that you never intended to give. You didn't offer it. Your evening or your Saturday, the last bit of your patience, am I right? Some of you won't hand it over at all, which is an issue. But some of you will, but only because you have to. That's mile 1. But what Jesus is teaching here is that obedience with a clenched fist, you're just grinding your teeth the entire time through it. It's still just mile 1. The second mile might be the first thing all week that's actually yours to even give and offer up to God in worship. It's like, dude, every Jewish boy, I just mentioned that, had a mile marker staked off in advance to determine just how far they would go. And it's like, I think that we all have our own version of that. What's your marker? What's your stake? How far will you go with your mother-in-law? How far will you go with your children? How far will you go with that guy that you're pouring into? How far will you go with that kid that doesn't have a male influence in his life and needs a man to help him navigate? You know the number. You know it. You do. You knew it before I finished the question. And the number, look at me, the number that you have in your mind that determines how far you will go is the size of your discipleship and your worship. I think that most marriages in here, maybe not most, that's not fair, but there are many marriages here that are running, they're 1 mile marriages. They're running on 1 mile. I did my half, and you're half to the inch, don't you? And you know whose turn it is to get up in the middle of the night with a baby. You know who did the dishes last, and you know what time you got home and they got home. And you staked your mile out a long time ago, and it's like second mile marriages. They don't count. They don't count halves or steps. Mile 2 is doing the very thing that's like very clearly and documentably, that's not even a word, their job. And you know it, and they know it, and it's doing that and not even mentioning it once that you did it. Because you didn't do it to get recognition. You did it for what? For worship. You did it for worship. Right? May it be true of us. Last one. I show surprising grace when I open my hand before I calculate the cost. This is very interesting. In verse 42, it says, give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. This is interesting because in this paragraph so far, you have a guy that slaps, you have a guy that sues, you have a guy who forces, right? And then all of a sudden in verse 42, you're like, where'd the bad guy go? Where's the villain at? There is no villain in verse 42. Nobody wronged you here in this verse. No one has insulted you or sued you or commandeered you. They just have a hand that's held out toward you because they don't have stuff. They're poor. I think Jesus does this intentionally because he just took away one of our favorite excuses, I think, by giving us verse 42. We tell ourselves that grace is just hard because we have to direct it toward people that we think are not worthy of it, that they're the bad people, they're the evil people, you know? But sometimes grace isn't turning the cheek in the face of a slap from an enemy. Sometimes grace is just opening your hand for someone who needs your help. Notice both verbs here are they're just like wide open, dude. Like give has no qualifier, and ask has no qualifier. The phrase "do not refuse." You see that? It's active, which means you should be actively not refusing. Okay, so don't repudiate or reject. Jesus is saying that he's like my people, the people in my kingdom, the citizens that belong to my kingdom. They don't just like not slam the door to people in need. They're the kind of people who don't have a door. They don't have a door. In Deuteronomy 15, there's this law about lending to a poor brother. And every seventh year, how this worked. Every seventh year, the debts got wiped out, or every seventh year, the year of Jubilee. So he actually anticipates this because he knows there's going to be Jewish people who have brothers in need, and they're going to be calculating in their head, and they're going to say, "Ooh, you're asking for this much, but I know that the seventh year is coming up, and you're only going to work for me for 14 months, and this is a bad deal. This is a bad deal for me." Look what he says, be careful that there's not a wicked thought in your heart. The seventh year, the year of release is near, and your eye look grudgingly on your poor brother, and you give him nothing. So God anticipates the tightening of the credit market, and he sees people doing the arithmetic in their head. And God calls that math, that equation, you know what he calls it? In the text, wicked, evil. God writes down in the Torah the excuse that you were about to use towards someone in need, and he did it 3,000 years before you even thought of it. Now, this is hard, man, because I remember I was in seminary. I worked at Starbucks like 15 hours a week, and I worked at the church 20 hours a week. I made like $7 an hour, dude, you know? But I got tips, right? We would just dispense these tips. So every like second pay period, I would get this like wad of singles, And it was like one of the best parts of my month was to get these singles. I remember getting this fresh wad of singles, and Jenna kind of let me use that for, things I wanted to do out in behind NC State or whatever. And this poor dude comes up to me, this homeless man, and he says, hey, brother, you got any money on you? And I was like, yes, I do. Yes, I do. He's like, oh, awesome, man. Like, I was wondering if you could buy me like a lunch. And so, we go, and I'm hating this the entire time, just full transparency. And we get to go to some shop, and I buy him a sandwich, and I pull out my wad of singles, and I buy him this sandwich for like $8 or whatever, and it hurt, which is so stupid. Like now, it's crazy. God's done a great work in my life. But then he sees the wad of cash, and what does he do? He's like, can I get that too? I was like, dang it. Dang it. Yeah, here you go. And I just, like, everything in me was just, like, cringing. And it's like, dude, just this massive lack of generosity in me because I'm not seeing the generosity of God toward me. You know? It was like, dude, I know it was, like I said, it was a wad. It was probably like $19. It's probably what it was, you know? But it was all single, so it looked good. Right. Now, this is hard. It's like, is Jesus telling us that we have to empty out our bank accounts to everyone that asks? You know, I don't think that's what this means. Augustine said something 1,600 years ago that I think is helpful for us. The text says to give to everyone who asks, not to give everything to everyone who asks. I think that's it. Jesus assumes that there's a real need in front of you, and he's commanding you to not ignore that. And I think that should convict some of us when we see people in need. Like, do you try to avoid, I hope they don't see me. That's a hard issue. That's a hard issue. Jesus wants us to actually gravitate toward those in need, toward the vulnerable, toward the people who need some help, toward the people that are stuck in their sin and their shame, not to avoid them because of what? Your comfort? Is that why you do it? You know? It's like, but he assumes the need is real, and he commands us to not ignore it, but he doesn't tell us the specific mechanics of how to help. And I think that's a mercy because this is Spirit-motivated wisdom. The Spirit of God leads us in unique moments to do unique things, and he actually works through that. And there's some principles in the text of Scripture, like 2 Thessalonians 3:10 says this, if a man won't work, you don't eat. You don't eat. John Calvin said this, Jesus' purpose here was to make his disciples generous, not prodigal or wasteful. So I don't want us to walk out of here with like guilt, but with a plan. Yeah, maybe you just are more intentional about a plan. Maybe you need to buy a meal for someone. Instead of handing out cash, you buy a meal for someone that you see in need. Or like, do you have a shelter's phone number in your phone that you can help them and direct people, hey, I'd love to help you find some shelter for the night. You know, maybe we have a benevolence fund here, guys, and we use it. And there could be more money in there. If you have a heart to see, you know what, like I just want the elders to like distribute funds to people in need as they are privy to those things that I'm just not privy to, like you could give to our benevolence fund online, and we'll use those funds to bless people in need. Sometimes you can't give money at all. And you know, that's not necessarily rejecting the person, but you give what you can in the circumstances you find yourself in. Maybe that's a word of grace. Maybe that's a prayer, you know? Jesus wants us to be a community that is just radically generous. And we actually want to meet people's legitimate needs. We don't just want to buy ourselves a good deed to stroke our own conscience. And every one of us knows which one we did last. Jesus here is reversing the order. It's open hand first. You see that? And then wisdom about how, never wisdom as an excuse about whether. No math. All right? I gotta end this. So look back at verse 41 with me one more time. It's the word, look at the word for a soldier commandeering a man's back. That word appears exactly one other time in the Gospel of Matthew, and it's in Matthew 27, verse 32. And I'll put it on the screen for you. As they went out, they found a man of Cyrene, Simon by name, and they compelled him to carry his cross. Same word. Jesus is teaching the second mile ethic for his kingdom, but he's also the one who walked it. Does that make sense? Up a road outside Jerusalem, carrying a beam that he didn't deserve for a people who never asked him to do it. And so this is the king who doesn't just preach this ethic, but he actually lives it. He carries a cross down the very ethic that he's calling us to live in. And it wasn't only the mile. This is so interesting. When they crucified him, John's gospel says the soldiers, they split his outer garments 4 ways. But then when they came to the tunic, the last thing that he owned, they threw lots for it. It's both garments. It's the same 2 words that Jesus is talking about in Matthew 5. The same 2 words. They took his shirt and then he handed over his coat. He did that. And then he hung there with nothing. You know, I know we have great art that portrays Jesus on a cross. He was crucified naked, in total shame and humility, fully exposed. No clothing, no rights, no defense, stripped bare in front of the world that he made. I gave up my minivan and I drove home ticked. Jesus gave up the clothes off his back to men holding the nails and the hammer. And he did it willingly. There's also this interesting shape here in this text where it's something happens and then there's a second. You know, it's a second. You get a second slap. There's a second garment that you give. There's a second mile that you walk. It's like, you know, in the law, there's always like a second thing. It's a second eye. You make a wound to an eye. You get it back. There's two involved in that. A second tooth, and the second thing always came out of the one who wronged you. That's how the Torah worked. Jesus does a shift here. He's the one who keeps the second thing. He loses it the first time, and then he takes the second wound into himself. So he's just changing whose hand it's coming out of. The second cheek and the second coat and the second, every one of those things comes out of you. He doesn't abolish an eye for an eye. He's shifting and reversing the one who pays for it. And now, here's the gospel. If you're here today and you don't know what a Christian is, here's the gospel. In this passage, first and foremost, you're the one who did the slapping. And it wasn't toward a person, it was toward the face of God. That's what sin is. Sin is an offense to God. You're not just like disagreeing with heaven on policy. You have looked at the God who made you, and you have backhanded him and say, screw you. You gave him the finger, and you said, I'm going to live the way that I want to live. That's called sin. Aimed at God, the God who made you and sustains the breath in your lungs. And God is perfectly just, and he demands a second blow toward that. You've slapped him. He demands justice to fall on you. But the gospel is that he didn't come to bring judgment to you, but he came to bear it for you in the person and work of Jesus. He came in his own son. He turned his own son's cheek. He took the retaliatory blow in himself, in Jesus, which means that everything Jesus has asked us to do this morning, he did it first, and he did it for you. Honest question, does that move you? Does that move you? Are you moved by the cross of Christ? Are you moved by the work of redemption and atonement at the cross of Christ? If you are not, I don't have anything to say to you. I can't motivate you to be a better cheek turner. You have no power. You're stuck. But Pastor, if I live like this, people are just going to walk all over me. I'll be a doormat. Let me tell you what's more impractical. What's really impractical is spending your whole life pulling yourself into tighter and tighter circles so that no one can ever hurt you ever again. This is C.S. Lewis's idea. C.S. Lewis said that if you love anything, pay attention. You'll need to get this. If you love anything, your heart will be wrung out and possibly broken. So if you want to guarantee that never happens ever again, then give your heart to no one but yourself. Wrap it in hobbies, wrap it in little comforts, lock it in the coffin of your own self-centeredness, and it'll be safe in there. Dark, motionless, airless. But in that little box, it will change. It won't break. It'll become unbreakable and impenetrable and irredeemable. So is it impractical to turn the other cheek? I would argue that it's impractical not to because of what it does to you. You think that when you keep score that you're just protecting yourself, but you're not. You're calcifying. And you're going to end up stone. if you're like me, you read this text and you're like, dude, I don't know if I can live like this. Two things for you. Number one, Jesus, who lived he lived this ethic perfectly. He lives inside of his people. A lot of you have this idea of Christianity of, I'm going to try harder. I can just do it myself. And your prayer stops being, Jesus, help me pull this off, to Jesus, would you just come live your life through me? And he will. He will. And then secondly, he died for the exact places where you fail in this. Every backhand that you've ever returned, every mile you refused, every hand you've walked past, it is covered and it is paid for in full by the blood of the Son. Your King requires you to answer both offense and need with surprising grace. But look at me, grace is only surprising until you remember where you got yours.